Hello, and welcome to a Toast to Truth. This podcast is all about the emotional, mental, and financial toll running a business takes on us as women entrepreneurs. This is my intro episode 100 of A Toast to Truth, and I am so excited to begin this podcast. It's been a long time coming, but it's finally here. So before I really get into what this podcast is and what to expect from the first season, I want to start with popping some bubbly. So popping some bubbly. This is the segment where myself and my guests will give a celebration, aha moment, achievement based on that week's episode. So for the introduction episode, I'm so excited that I finally started a podcast after years of people saying I should have one. But I wanted to create a podcast on topics that I truly believed in and something I could commit to wholeheartedly. So A Toast to Truth is that, my commitment and something I believe in related to business. So let's get into who I am. Well, I am a loud, crazy, fun-loving, outspoken introvert. And I love the Dallas Mavericks, Netflix, and chocolate, especially if the chocolate is drizzled on a brownie. So that's me, Vernetta Freeney, in all of my crazy glory. But honestly, I am an introvert. I prefer smaller groups. I prefer mainly to stay at home and a lot of quiet time. But I am outspoken on topics that I'm passionate about. And I'm really passionate about people being honest instead of telling you to just dive into entrepreneurship, jump into it, quit your 9-to-5. I think people need to be honest and let you know what you're really jumping into so that you know and you can brace and prepare yourself for what you're getting into. I'm not saying don't go into entrepreneurship. I love it. But if people had told me some of the things that I would encounter, I probably would not have freaked out as much along the way. So that's who I am, and segue into, why I started this podcast. Now, for years, people have said I have a lot to say, a lot to share, I should have a podcast. But every one of those suggestions were always related to something that I did, but it wasn't something I wanted to completely create something around. I don't like to give business lessons per se, and a lot of people were wanting the tips and things like that. There's a lot of podcasts out there giving you business tips, interviewing all of these amazing entrepreneurs. That's not something I wanted to do. I'm a blue ocean type of girl. And for those who don't know what blue ocean means, blue ocean is where you really create something where there's less competition, and you have a bigger pool of resources to work from. You have a larger audience because there's less people competing for them. In a red ocean, think of soda. Soda is a red ocean. How many different soda companies do you see on the aisle when you're walking down the grocery store? That's a red ocean. So in the podcast world, even though it's not as many podcasts as there are blogs out there, I noticed that there's a large group of podcasts, especially when it comes to business podcasts, that do a lot of interviews. And you can have one person on like 10 different podcasts. And how much can they really share if they're on several different podcasts and they're being asked very, very similar questions? So I didn't want to create a podcast like that. I wanted to create something that I felt would show my personality, be more interactive, be a little bit more lively, And so that's what a toast to truth is. I have special guests, which are my friends, and all of them own businesses. All of them have done amazing things in their businesses, but they've also overcome some amazing trials, and we're sharing that along the journey. So each week they chime in with things that we've all overcome when it comes to that episode of the podcast. So what can you expect from a toast to truth? Well, you can expect a lot of laughter. There was a lot of laughter in season 1. You can expect 7 amazing episodes. So season 1 is just going to be 7 episodes. I want to hear from you. I want to hear if you liked the angle I'm coming from, if you like the type of topics that I want to discuss with you, want to share with you. What you can expect are some stories that you may not even realize happens in entrepreneurship. Or if you know me, you've been following me because of Women Are Game Changers, my former company, then it may shock you. Some of the stories I share about things that happened to me while I was running that company and while I was running Fusion Tour, which was my national tour for 3 years. And so what to expect is truth, honesty, transparency. I didn't hold anything back on my stories. I know some of the stories that were shared by some of my guests were from their clients, so they couldn't divulge too much information and they couldn't share too many specific details. So they shared what they could to kind of emphasize and highlight the stories that I shared about what has happened to me during my entrepreneur journey. So I'm getting honest, I'm getting truthful, I'm getting transparent, and I'm okay with that. I'm at a place where I feel that if no one tells other people coming along, then it's just going to be a cycle of forbidden truth, as I like to call it. Things that you discuss with your friends behind closed doors, but should be put in a public open forum so people know, like, hey, this really does happen in entrepreneurship. It's okay, but here are some ways that you can probably overcome that, some ways to help you probably avoid it if possible. So for season 1, we are going to begin airing episode 1 on Valentine's Day, February 14th, and season 1 will end with episode 7 on March 27th. So every Sunday, a new episode will air. I am on Libsyn. You can also find it on my blog, VernettaRFreeman.com. And I am going to figure out iTunes. That's the truth, y'all. I am not an Apple user. I've never purchased anything from Apple or anything. So I don't know how to use iTunes. Truthful moment here. Don't know how to use iTunes. I have been trying to figure it out. I decided to launch this podcast mid-January. I've learned as much as I could in a short span of time. I recorded the whole season, have gotten as much as I could done, have figured out at least one place I can air, and that was Libsyn. And I looked at some other ones. And side note, no one said anything about podcast hosting was going to cost something. Like, you know, like regular hosting on your blog, you know, you pay every month for them to host it. I know it's not supposed to be free, but it would have been a nice heads up for all the people who keep telling other people to jump in and do a podcast to actually say something like, you're going to pay $5 a month for a site to host your podcast. That's just a side note, something I learned, because in my mind, I was going to be everywhere, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Libsyn, iTunes. All of those places cost some money. So I went with Libsyn, and we'll see how that goes. And I will figure out iTunes. I will figure it out. So as soon as I figure out iTunes, I Toast the Truth will be on iTunes. But in the meantime, you can go to Libsyn, VernettaRFreeman.com, and those will be the places you can find it. So that is my little truthful moment as far as where you can find me online. So I am going to, if you hear this in any of the episodes where I say it's time to take a sip, and then you hear this. This is going to be our commercial break. Okay, so it's time to take a sip is our commercial break. If you haven't figured out just yet, the whole podcast is geared around champagne. I love mimosas. I love hosting events during brunch time so I can have a mimosa. And that's another thing I wanted to do with the podcast is make it fun, but also make it something that I like, something that's related to an interest of mine. And I love brunch-type events, brunch time events. I love mimosas. So you'll hear a lot of champagne type of sounds throughout. So what's different about this podcast? Well, it's more of a niche podcast, and it's not going to be interview style because most people are used to that in business. It's going to be me mainly speaking, and each episode will have a special guest, like I stated, who are my friends. They all own businesses, and they'll chime in. So it's not going to be a back and forth of, hey, how did you do this, and what did you do? Because in all honesty, we hear a lot of podcasts on, I make $10,000 a month. And they tell you that, and they tell you, they have coaching clients or they sell products, but they don't really tell you, like, how they did it. You have to pay for that, which is very understandable. But a lot of times they may not tell you that, hey, the first time I did it was a total dud. Like, I did everything this coach told me to do, and it still didn't work, and I was frustrated, and I was mad, and I still had to pay my rent or mortgage, and I didn't have the money. So we're going to get that honest in the podcast. Another thing you can expect are worksheets. Every episode will have a worksheet because me, being a former educator, being a former first grade teacher, I always like people to learn something. I always want you to walk away from something I'm doing, whether it's a webinar, a blog post, something I'm posting online, or this podcast. I want you to walk away with something that you're like, I could do that, and I could do that in 5 minutes. I'm always trying to look for simple ways that you can take something, a lesson I've learned, and implement it in your business within 5 minutes. I'm not into having you kill yourself trying to do a lot of things, and you get frustrated because you can't figure it out. Yes, there will be times where you would need to reach out to me or a coach or a consultant or someone to show you how to help you create the steps to get something done. But essentially, there are a lot of things in business you can do, and you can do quickly and easily as long as someone tells you this is how you do it, and you're able to do it in 5 minutes. So that's my thing. I really like to help people simplify their business life in a way where you could take what you hear and implement it in your business. Now, remember, that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes you're going to need to reach out to someone and have them actually help you plan that process out. And we're going to have segments. So you'll hear different sounds, like I said, related to champagne. It's time to take a sip, our commercial break. Final toast will be the takeaway from every episode. Poppin' Bubbly is our celebration. So I wanted it to be fun. When you're listening to this podcast, get you a nice glass, of mimosa. And for those of you who've ever been to Fusion Tour, if I've held a mimosa bar at Fusion Tour, it was always create your own mimosa. So choose your juice, choose your fruit, choose your champagne, grab your glass, and listen to a toast to truth each episode, each week. Okay, so that is a little bit of a rundown of what you can expect from a toast to truth, who I am, Vernetta, and why I decided to create this podcast. So now it is time for my final toast. So my final toast for the intro episode is don't get into something until you're ready. Know what you want to give and be ready for the commitment. I needed to be ready to commit fully, wholeheartedly, completely, using a lot of repetitive adjectives because when I do something, I want to do it all the way. I don't want to half do it. And for me, I didn't want to do a podcast and then it becomes dead after episode 1. I really wanted to create something that grabbed your attention, captivated you, and wanted you to come back every single week to listen. Well, at least for season 1. If you want season 2, go ahead and let me know if you like season 1, and then I'll come back with season 2 with even more topics we could discuss. So, this has been a toast to truth with Vernetta Arfrini. That's me chatting it up and letting you know what to expect, what it is we're doing, and how long season 1 is with a toast of truth, and getting you prepared for all the consequences, you can expect related to the topics we talked about. Until episode 1, which airs on February 14th, this is me, and I'll see you next week.